I've bought a lot of storage units in my life. Some were full of nothing but moth-eaten clothes, broken TVs, and boxes of old magazines no one wanted. But nothing, and I mean nothing, could have prepared me for what I found when I dropped $1,200 on a unit that, from the outside, looked like every other dusty, forgotten box in this massive facility. It was a Tuesday morning, and the air was thick with that mix of stale dust and engine oil that every storage auction seems to have. This unit caught my attention because the door had this dull red paint, but near the bottom, there was a strange scrape mark, like something heavy had been pushed in and out multiple times. I couldn't see much through the crack. Just a glimpse of an old tarp in the far back. Bidding started low, $200. A few people went back and forth, but when it hit $700, the crowd started to thin. I don't know why, but something in my gut told me to keep going. $800, $1,000. Finally, at $1,200, the auctioneer slammed the gavel. It was mine, and I had no clue I'd just bought the most insane find of my life. The moment the padlock came off, I yanked the door up. A gust of stale air hit me, thick with that musty smell of something that hadn't seen daylight in years. At first glance, the unit looked empty. Well, empty except for one massive shape at the back, draped in an old, gray, dust-covered tarp. The floor had faint tire marks leading right up to it. My hands were actually shaking when I walked over. The tarp was stiff from years of grime, and when I grabbed the edge, a puff of dust exploded into my face. I coughed, pulled harder, and that's when I saw it. A curved fender, chrome trim, a perfect, glossy, well, dusty, line of bodywork that screamed speed even though it was completely still. My heart skipped a beat. I yanked the tarp off completely, and there it was, a supercar. Not just any supercar, something I instantly recognized from car magazines I read as a teenager. It was a Banshee V12 GT, one of only 30 ever produced in the late 1980s. A hand-built monster with a top speed north of 200 miles per hour, but one that had mysteriously disappeared from the public eye after a few years because of, well, rumors. Some said the company went bankrupt. Others said one of the prototype engines had catastrophic failures. But here, in this storage unit, was a piece of that automotive mystery. The paint was once a brilliant metallic silver, now dulled by years of dust. The interior, pure black leather with red stitching, perfectly preserved under a thin layer of grime. I could barely believe what I was seeing. My friend Mark, who had tagged along, just stood there whispering, "No way, no way," over and over. We checked the odometer. Only 4,328 miles. That's basically nothing for a car of this age. And then came the big question. Why was it here? There was no title in sight, no registration papers, just the car and a few cardboard boxes stacked nearby. I opened the boxes, hoping for answers. The first had old service manuals, including one with Banshee GT, Confidential, stamped on the cover. The second box was heavier. Inside were old photographs, black and white shots of the car on a racetrack, with men in racing overalls standing beside it. Some of the shots were marked with dates from 1988. Then, at the very bottom of the box, I found something that sent chills through me, a thick, sealed envelope with nothing but "Property of Vortex Engineering" written on it. Vortex was the company that made the Banshee, and they had gone bankrupt decades ago. I slid the papers out. They weren't just service logs. They were internal memos, talking about engine instability at high RPM, and project termination under NDA terms. There was even one letter from the CEO ordering all prototypes and unsold units to be secured and stored until legal matters are resolved, which meant this car was never meant to be sold. It was supposed to be destroyed or locked away forever. Suddenly, I realized what that meant for me. On one hand, I had possibly the rarest supercar in existence sitting in front of me. On the other, there could be legal complications if the wrong people found out I had it. Mark grinned and said, "You know what this means, right? This could be worth millions." But I couldn't shake the feeling that owning it might be risky. Still, we couldn't just leave it there. We brought in a flatbed tow truck, loaded the car up, and took it straight to my garage. The sunlight hit it just right as we rolled it off the truck, and for a second, it looked like it belonged on the cover of Motor Trend. The next day, I called a collector friend of mine, someone who deals in rare and exotic cars. When I showed him the pictures, he nearly fell out of his chair. He told me that if this was a genuine Banshee V12 GT prototype, there were maybe two others in private hands. At auction, even without official paperwork, it could fetch anywhere from $750,000 to over $1 million, maybe more. Of course, the catch was that once it hit the public eye, the original company's legal successors might come knocking. So now I had a decision to make: keep this once-in-a-lifetime treasure hidden in my garage, or take the risk and let the world know it still existed. One thing was certain, that $1,200 gamble had turned into the wildest ride of my life, and the engine hadn't even been started yet. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept going out to the garage, switching on the light, and just staring at the Banshee V12 GT. It was surreal, like finding a dinosaur egg in your backyard. But there was one thing I hadn't dared to try yet: starting it. I kept telling myself it would be better to have a mechanic inspect it first. After all, it had been sitting in a storage unit for who knows how many decades. But deep down, I wanted to hear that engine roar. By sunrise, I'd made up my mind. I grabbed my phone, hit record, and set it on a tripod. If this thing started, I wanted proof. First, I opened the hood. The engine was a work of art, a massive V12 with polished intake manifolds, and a gold-plated Banshee GT emblem bolted to the top. Everything was covered in a thin layer of dust, but there was no corrosion. Whoever stored it must have done it right. The oil looked surprisingly clean. The coolant reservoir was still half full, and the belt seemed intact. I hooked up a battery jumper and slid into the driver's seat. The leather groaned under my weight, but it didn't crack. My hands were trembling as I put the key into the ignition, a key that looked like it belonged in a high-end Swiss watch rather than a car. I turned it. Click. Nothing. I tried again. This time, the dash lights flickered, and the gauges twitched. The fuel gauge crept up to a quarter tank. I turned the key all the way, and then it happened. A deep, guttural growl erupted from under the hood. The whole car shook, like it had just woken from a decades-long coma, and was angry about it. The idle was uneven at first, then settled into a low, throaty purr that made the hairs on my arms stand up. I couldn't believe it. The Banshee was alive. I gave it a gentle rev, and the sound was unlike anything I'd ever heard, a blend of mechanical precision and raw aggression, like a symphony played on thunderclouds. The tachometer needle danced up and down, and I could almost hear the ghosts of its racing past. Then I noticed something strange on the center console. A small, locked compartment with no visible keyhole, just a sliding panel. I pushed it, and it clicked open. Inside was a small cassette tape. The label read, "Test Run, NRBURGRING, 1989. I scrambled to find an old cassette player. The audio quality was rough, but I could clearly hear the scream of the Banshee's V12 on a racetrack, tires squealing, gears snapping into place. In the background, men's voices shouted in excitement and then panic. The engine roared higher. Someone yelled, "Shut it down! Shut it down!" and the tape cut off. It sent chills down my spine. What happened on that test run? Was this the reason the project was scrapped? I needed answers. I started digging online, posting vague questions in obscure automotive forums, being careful not to reveal I had the car. After a few hours, I got a private message from a username I didn't recognize, Vortexist. The message read, "If you have what I think you have, it's not safe to talk about it here. Some of us worked on the Banshee project. We were told to keep quiet, but I saw your hints. If you want the truth, meet me in person. No phones. Bring the cassette." I hesitated. It felt like something out of a spy movie, but my curiosity was stronger than my fear. The next evening, I met Vortexist at a diner off the highway. He was an older man, maybe in his late 60s, with sharp eyes and a weathered face. When I slid the cassette across the table, he didn't even touch it at first, just stared at me. "You have the car, don't you?" he said quietly. I nodded. He sighed, leaning back. "There were only 5 running prototypes. Yours was number 3. On that tape, you hear the final test before everything went wrong. At 190 miles per hour, the engine started overheating. We thought we could push it just a little more, but the rear suspension failed. The driver survived, but the car was nearly destroyed. We rebuilt it, but the higher-ups decided the risk was too great. All units were ordered into storage. Some were destroyed. Some, well, looks like one ended up in your hands." I asked him if it was safe to drive. He smirked. "If you're gentle, maybe, but push it like we did and you might end up in the same trouble." Before I could ask more, he slid me a small, sealed envelope. "Blueprints," he said. "Everything we knew about fixing the flaws. If you're smart, you'll keep this between us.